Do you really think the horizon is far enough, Daniel? The voice was soft, barely a whisper over the crystal rim of a champagne flute, yet it carried the weight of a gavel strike. Far enough for what? Daniel adjusted his silk tie, his reflection distorted in the darkened window, oblivious to the eyes watching him from the shadows. To outrun a debt that wasn't paid with money, the woman replied, stepping back into the darkness. Enjoy the water, darling. It's the only thing deep enough to hold your secrets. The Mediterranean sun didn't just shine, it assaulted the senses. It turned the azure waves of the Monaco harbor into a blinding field of crushed diamonds, the heat radiating off the concrete pier in shimmering waves. Amidst a forest of gleaming white fiberglass and polished teak, the sovereign sat like an apex predator sleeping in the shallows. It was 300 feet of obsidian black steel and tempered glass, a vessel so aggressively modern it made the surrounding luxury liners look like bath toys. It didn't bob in the water, it loomed, cutting a silhouette that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. Daniel Harris adjusted his aviator sunglasses, wiping away a bead of sweat that prickled at his hairline. The heat was oppressive, but the cold knot in his stomach had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the man standing next to him. Andrew Lewis, the venture capitalist whose signature was the only thing standing between Daniel and a federal indictment, looked up at the black ship with a critical squint. He was a man of sterile tastes, preferring clean lines and predictable outcomes. "A bit aggressive, isn't it?" Andrew remarked, his voice dry as parchment. "I usually prefer white hulls, cleaner. This looks like a warship disguised as a hotel." "It's distinct, Andrew. Like the deal we're closing," Daniel said, forcing a confident grin that stretched his skin but didn't reach his eyes. He placed a possessive hand on the lower back of the young woman beside him. "Sophie, look at that. Have you ever seen anything like it?" Sophie Lawson, 24 and draped in a sundress that cost more than Daniel's first car, lowered her oversized Dior shades. She chewed her gum with a rhythmic, indifferent snap, scrolling through her phone with a manicured thumb. "It's big, Danny, but is there Wi-Fi? The last time we went on a boat in Cabo, the signal was trash. I can't be offline right now. My engagement metrics are peaking." Daniel's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "It's a mega yacht, Sophie. It has satellite links better than the Pentagon. Just put the phone away for 5 minutes." He was irritable, his nerves frayed. The liquidity crunch at Harris Tech was a noose tightening by the hour. He had leveraged his last remaining unfrozen assets, and some he technically didn't own, to charter this beast through a shell company. The broker had been mysterious, offering a promotional rate for high-profile businessmen, provided they signed a strict, non-disclosure agreement regarding the crew's identity. Daniel didn't care about the crew. He didn't care about the ship. He cared about impressing Andrew Lewis enough to secure a $50 million injection before the quarterly audit on Monday morning. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Harris." The voice came from the top of the gangway, cutting through the humidity. Standing there was a man who looked less like a steward and more like a retired mercenary poured into a tuxedo. He wore a crisp white uniform, but the fabric strained against broad shoulders and thick arms. His name tag read, James Walker. "Captain Walker," Daniel said, leading the group up the ramp, the metal vibrating slightly under his feet. "Impressive vessel." "Mr. Walker will suffice. I am the head of operations," James corrected smoothly. His eyes, the color of flint, lingered on Sophie for a second too long. A look of recognition? Pity, before flicking to Daniel with a glint of amusement that Daniel found instantly unsettling. "The owner prefers privacy, but has instructed us to cater to your every specific need." "Excellent," Daniel said, stepping onto the teak deck. It was cool underfoot, freshly scrubbed. This is my associate, Mr. Lewis, and my partner, Miss Lawson. Partner, James repeated, the word rolling around his mouth like a marble, testing its weight. Of course. Let me show you to the staterooms. We depart in 20 minutes. The route is set for open waters. No land in sight for 3 days. Just as you requested. Complete isolation. As they walked deeper into the ship, the interior defied standard nautical design. It was a brutalist mix of dark velvet, cold marble and chrome. The air conditioning was set to a chill that raised goosebumps on Sophie's arms. It felt less like a vacation home and more like a fortress. "Danny," Sophie whispered, clutching his arm as they passed a hallway lined with abstract paintings that looked disturbingly like violent storms. "This place is creepy. It's freezing." "It's climate-controlled luxury, Sophie. Stop complaining," Daniel hissed, pulling his arm away. "Just smile at Andrew, and don't talk about your Instagram metrics. This weekend determines if we keep the penthouse or move to a motel." Unbeknownst to Daniel, every word they spoke, every hiss, every whisper, was being picked up by high-fidelity microphones embedded in the Art Deco sconces, traveling through fiber-optic cables down to the belly of the ship. 3 decks below the waterline, where the sunlight couldn't reach, the hum of the engines was a rhythmic heartbeat that vibrated through the floorboards of the aquarium. It was a master suite, unlike any other, designed with one wall made entirely of reinforced, pressure-treated glass, looking directly out into the deep ocean. The water outside was a heavy, twilight blue, transitioning to black as the depth increased. Rebecca Hayes stood with her forehead resting against the cold glass. Outside, a school of silver fish darted away in a unified flash as the massive thrusters engaged, churning the water into white violence. She was 42, though she looked a timeless 30. Her hair, once a frizzy brown that Daniel had constantly suggested she dye and straighten, was now a sleek curtain of platinum, cut sharp at her jawline. She wore a tailored suit of charcoal silk that moved like liquid, barefoot on the plush carpet. "They are settled in the Viper Suite and the King's cabin," a voice came over the intercom. It was James. "And the emotional temperature?" Rebecca asked, not turning away from the blue abyss. Her breath fogged the glass, a fleeting ghost. "Daniel is terrified. He's hiding it with bravado, but his heart rate monitors on the smartwatch hack show. He's peaking at 110 beats per minute. The cortisol levels in his sweat are likely off the charts. The girl, Sophie, is already bored. Andrew Lewis is playing his part perfectly." Rebecca smiled, a cold expression that didn't invite warmth. It was the smile of a chess player who sees mate in 3. "Good. Let them simmer." 5 years. It had been 5 years since Daniel had left her. He hadn't just left. He had incinerated her. He had hidden assets in offshore accounts, framed her for embezzlement at their shared consultancy firm to clear his own name, and left her facing an SEC investigation while he ran off to the Caribbean with his then assistant. He didn't know the investigation had been dropped due to lack of evidence. He didn't know that Rebecca, fueled by a rage that burned hotter than rocket fuel, had taken the scraps of her reputation and built a shadow logistics empire. She moved things, rare art, sensitive data, gold bullion, for people who paid in crypto and favors. The Sovereign wasn't just a toy, it was her mobile headquarters, a sovereign state unto itself. And Daniel had chartered it. The irony was so rich it tasted like iron in her mouth. "Do you want the feed on the main screen?" James asked, entering the room. He didn't knock. James was the only one who knew the whole story. He had found her when she was sleeping in her car, broken and bankrupt, and taught her that kindness was a liability in their world. "Yes," Rebecca said, turning to the wall of monitors. The screens flickered to life. On screen 1, Daniel was pouring himself a scotch from a crystal decanter, his hand trembling enough to clink the glass against the spout. On screen 2, Sophie was taking selfies in the bathroom mirror, posing with a duck face, oblivious to the camera hidden behind the two-way mirror. "He looks older," Rebecca observed, tracing his pixelated face on the screen. "Softer. The guilt is eating him, or maybe just the fear of getting caught." "Fear ages a man faster than time," James said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Ryan Mitchell called the bridge. He's panicked. He's tracking the flight Daniel was supposed to be on to Zurich. He doesn't know Daniel detoured here to meet Andrew." Ryan Mitchell, Daniel's CFO and fellow snake, the man who had forged the signatures on the documents that ruined her. "Let Ryan sweat. He's next," Rebecca said softly. She walked over to the console and tapped a command. The lighting in Daniel's suite on the screen shifted subtly, becoming harsher, more clinical, subliminal discomfort. "Is chef prepared for tonight?" "The menu is set exactly to your specifications. Every dish has a history." "And Christopher?" "Christopher Young is in the engine room. He's ready to cut the stabilizers on your mark. It'll make the dinner service interesting." Rebecca watched Daniel on the screen. He was looking at his phone, no doubt checking his bank balance or stocks that were plummeting due to the rumors she had leaked. He had brought his mistress to a palace floating on the water, thinking he was the king. He had no idea he was the jester in a court of executioners. "He thinks he's here to save his company," Rebecca murmured. "He's about to find out he can't even save himself." "Grace is asking if she should make contact," James noted. Grace Mitchell, Ryan's estranged sister and Rebecca's head of intelligence. The web was tangled, incestuous, and tight. Not yet. Let him get comfortable. Let him drink the wine. Let him feel like he's won. Then we turn off the lights. The dining room of the Sovereign was a study in intimidation. The table was a single slab of black marble, imported from Italy, long enough to seat 20 people. Yet it was set for only 3, creating a vast, echoing distance between the diners. The walls were lined with temperature-controlled wine racks that stretched from floor to ceiling, the bottles dark and dusty, looking like sleeping bats waiting to wake. Daniel sat at the head of the table, Andrew Lewis to his right and Sophie to his left. The air conditioning was set a few degrees too low, causing Sophie to shiver in her backless cocktail dress. She rubbed her arms, her jewelry clinking. "This is incredible, Daniel," Andrew said, swirling a glass of deep red vintage. He watched the legs of the wine run down the glass. "You really know how to treat a potential partner. Most CEOs just take me to a steakhouse in Manhattan." "I believe in immersion, Andrew," Daniel lied smoothly, though his voice was tight. "Business is about trust. And what better way to build trust than being isolated on the open ocean, away from distractions?" "Or trapped," Sophie mumbled, poking at the bread basket with a silver fork. Daniel shot her a glare that could have cracked the marble table. "Sophie is joking. She loves the sea." The double doors swung open silently. A line of stewards entered, moving with military precision. They placed appetizers down in perfect unison, the china clicking softly against the marble. "Escargots with a garlic and parsley reduction," the lead steward announced, lifting the silver cloche. The smell hit Daniel like a physical blow. Pungent garlic, earthy herbs, hot butter. He froze. His fork hovered halfway to the plate, his hand shaking. "Is something wrong, Daniel?" Andrew asked, skewering a snail with practiced ease. "These are delicious. Vintage recipe." "No," Daniel stammered, his face draining of color until he looked like wax. "Nothing, just unexpected. Escargots." It was the first meal he had ever eaten with Rebecca, on a cheap backpacking trip through France when they were students. They had been broke, happy, and in love. She had laughed at him because he was too afraid to try them. She had force-fed him one, kissing the garlic butter off his lips afterward. It was an intimate memory, one he hadn't thought of in a decade, buried under layers of betrayal. Coincidence, he told himself, his heart hammering against his ribs. It's a French menu. Standard luxury fare. Don't be paranoid. He forced himself to eat. The texture was perfect, rubbery and rich, but the taste was nostalgic and nauseating all at once. So, the numbers? Andrew said, shifting gears instantly to business, cutting through Daniel's internal panic. I've looked at Harris Tech's projections. The AI integration is promising, but your debt-to-equity ratio is alarming, Daniel. You're leveraged to the hilt. It's strategic debt, Andrew. Growth capital, Daniel defended, sweating again. He wiped his upper lip with a linen napkin. We're on the verge of a government contract that will triple our valuation. I heard the SEC was sniffing around again, Andrew said casually, taking a sip of wine. Old rumors. Rivals trying to depress the stock. Daniel waved a hand dismissively, though his voice pitched up an octave. My record is clean. My previous partners, well, they were the problem. I cut the dead weight years ago. In the control room below, Rebecca watched the feed, her eyes narrowing. Dead weight, she repeated, her voice void of emotion. Is that what I was? He's lying, James said, standing beside her. He doesn't have a government contract. He has a pending lawsuit from the Department of Defense for defective software. Andrew knows that, Rebecca said. Andrew knows everything I told him to know. Back in the dining room, the main course arrived. The stewards cleared the plates and set down large, silver domes. For the main course, the steward announced, roast duck with a cherry reduction and wild rice. Daniel dropped his wine glass. It shattered against the marble, red liquid splashing onto his white cuff like an arterial spray. The sound of the breaking glass echoed violently in the silent room. "Daniel!" Sophie shrieked, jumping back to avoid the mess. "What is wrong with you?" "I'm so sorry," Daniel gasped, standing up, his knees shaking so hard they knocked together. "Clumsy of me." The boat rocked. "The water is glass, Daniel," Andrew observed quietly, his eyes narrowing. "We haven't moved an inch." Roast duck, cherry reduction. It was the meal Rebecca had cooked for him the night he told her he was leaving, the night he told her he didn't love her anymore, while his bags were already packed in the trunk of his car. She had spent 6 hours cooking it, trying to salvage their marriage. He hadn't taken a single bite. He had left it to go cold on the table. "Are you okay, babe?" Sophie asked, looking at him with rare concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's just the menu." "It's very specific," Daniel muttered, staring at the duck breast sitting in the pool of dark red sauce. It looked like a wound. "The owner of the ship takes great pride in curating menus based on the psychological profile of the guests," the steward said. His face was blank, robotic. "Who is the owner?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising to a shout. "I want to meet him. I want to thank him for the hospitality." "The owner is a very private individual," the steward replied, signaling for the mess to be cleaned. "But I believe they will be joining you for brandy in the Obsidian Lounge later this evening." Daniel sank back into his chair. A cold dread was pooling in his stomach, heavier than the debt, heavier than the guilt. This wasn't a charter. This was a theater, and someone else had written the script. "Sophie," Daniel whispered, grabbing her hand under the table, his grip painful. "Don't go anywhere alone tonight." "You're hurting me," she hissed, pulling away. "You're acting crazy. Andrew is going to think you're on drugs." Andrew Lewis sliced his duck with surgical precision. "Actually, Daniel," Andrew said, not looking up from his plate, "I think the owner has excellent taste. This sauce captures the bitterness perfectly." Suddenly, the ship banked hard to the left. The cutlery slid across the marble. Sophie screamed as her chair tipped. "Stabilizers," Daniel said, clutching the table as the floor tilted beneath him. "They just cut the stabilizers." "Rough seas ahead," Andrew smiled, raising his glass to the empty chair at the end of the table, the seat where the host should be. To the dead weight, the transition from floating palace to hostile environment was not subtle. It was violent. When the stabilizers died, the Sovereign ceased to be a masterpiece of engineering and remembered it was a steel shell at the mercy of the Atlantic. The ship listed 15 degrees to port, a groaning metallic heave that sent the equilibrium of the dining room into chaos. The change was visceral. One moment, the room was filled with the polite clinking of silver on china. The next, the horizon line, visible through the portholes, slanted aggressively, inducing an immediate, dizzying nausea. Sophie Lawson turned a shade of sickly green that clashed violently with her coral designer dress. She clamped a manicured hand over her mouth, her eyes watering as the floor dipped beneath her heels. "Make it stop, Danny," she wailed, the boat heaving back to starboard with a shudder. "I'm going to be sick. Seriously, I can't do this." Daniel gripped the edge of the black marble table, his knuckles turning white as he fought to keep his own balance. The wine in his glass sloshed dangerously, staining the tablecloth like blood splatter. "It's just a squall, Sophie. A little turbulence. Breathe through your nose." "It is not a squall, Mr. Harris." James Walker appeared in the doorway. He stood differently now, legs wide, knees slightly bent, riding the roll of the deck with the ease of a man born on water. He looked solid, while Daniel felt like he was made of sand. "We are experiencing a critical hydraulic failure in the fin stabilizers," James announced, his voice devoid of alarm but heavy with authority. "The captain assures me we remain safe, though comfort is compromised." "Compromised?" Daniel spat, standing up and immediately grabbing the back of his heavy chair for support as the floor tilted again. "I'm paying $50,000 a day for this tub. Fix it. I want the smooth ride I paid for." "We are working on the mechanics," James said, his face a mask of stone. He gestured behind him. "Miss Lawson appears to be in significant distress. Our onboard medic, Miss Evans, can escort her to the infirmary. We have stronger anti-nausea medication than what is available in the guest suites. Intravenous if necessary." "I'm going," Sophie gasped, stumbling toward James without waiting for Daniel's permission. She looked desperate to escape the room, the smell of the roast duck and the tension radiating off Daniel. "Don't follow me, Daniel. You smell like fear and expensive cologne. It's making me gag." A young woman in a pristine medical uniform, Chloe Evans, stepped out of the shadows of the corridor. She caught Sophie's arm with a grip that was professional, yet firm, almost like a custody escort. As she led the stumbling girl away, Chloe leaned in close to Sophie's ear, her voice a whisper that cut through the sound of the wind rising outside. "Men like him always let the women suffer the rough seas while they drink the brandy," Chloe whispered, her tone laced with a conspiratorial poison. "Did he tell you the credit card he used for the deposit was declined twice? Or that the necklace you're wearing is a lease?" Sophie's eyes widened, her nausea momentarily forgotten as she looked back at Daniel with dawning suspicion. Then she was gone, the heavy doors clicking shut behind her. Daniel was left alone with Andrew Lewis. Andrew hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, holding his wine glass in a gyroscopic grip that kept the liquid level despite the ship's violent movement. He looked like a statue in the middle of an earthquake. "She has a point, Daniel," Andrew said, staring into the dark depths of the Pinot Noir. "You do smell like desperation tonight. It's quite pungent." "It's the stress, Andrew. The market. The audit," Daniel deflected, sitting back down, trying to look casual while hooking his legs around the table base to keep from sliding. "Once we sign the papers, everything stabilizes. Capital solves all problems." "Stability is an illusion," Andrew murmured, taking a slow sip. "Christopher Young tells me the hydraulics were cut manually. A valve was opened. Did you know that?" Daniel froze, the room spinning for a reason unrelated to the waves. "Who is Christopher Young?" "The chief engineer," Andrew said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, predatory, stripping Daniel down to his bones. "I like to know the names of the people keeping me afloat. Do you know the names of the people you drowned to get here, Daniel? Or were they just numbers on a ledger?" While Daniel fought to maintain his composure in the tilting dining room, the chaos was far more calculated 3 decks below. In the server room, illuminated only by the frantic blinking of blue LEDs, Grace Mitchell sat surrounded by towers of cooling fans and humming drives. She was Ryan Mitchell's sister. But where Ryan was loud, greedy, and careless, Grace was silent and lethal. Her fingers flew across a mechanical keyboard, the sound like rain on a tin roof. "Target is attempting to make an unauthorized call," Grace said into her headset, watching a signal spike on her monitor. "He's trying to bypass the ship's network." "Let him," Rebecca's voice came back, calm and icy. "Block the jammer for his device only. Let the rat call the sinking ship." Up in the dining room, Daniel had excused himself to the restroom, splashing cold water on his face. He looked at his reflection. Hollow eyes, pale skin. He pulled out his satellite phone. 0 bars. Then suddenly, 4 bars. A lifeline. He dialed Ryan Mitchell, his CFO. "Pick up! Pick up, you idiot!" Daniel hissed, pacing the small marble-tiled bathroom. "Daniel!" Ryan's voice cracked through the speaker, high-pitched and bordering on hysterical. The background noise was a cacophony of shouting and ringing phones. "Where the hell are you? I've been trying to reach you for 6 hours." "I'm securing the funding, Ryan. Calm down. I have Andrew Lewis on the hook." "What is it? Is it the audit?" "It's gone, Daniel. It's all gone." "What's gone?" "The money. All of it. The offshore accounts. The Caymans Trust. The shell in Panama. Even the cold storage crypto wallets. Someone drained them. Cleaned them out. Down to the cent." Daniel felt the blood drain from his extremities. "That's impossible. Those keys are encrypted. Only we have them." "And the files?" Ryan was sobbing now. "The emails we deleted regarding the Hayes frame-up? The ones proving we set Rebecca up? They were just emailed to the DOJ, the SEC, and the New York Times. My lawyer just called. He's quitting." "We wiped those drives," Daniel screamed, gripping the sink. "We destroyed the physical copies." "Someone had backups, Daniel, or someone recovered the data. I'm at the office now. The feds are in the lobby. I can see the flashing lights downstairs. I'm going to jail, Daniel. I'm not taking the fall for you this time." "Ryan, listen to me." "No, you listen. I tracked the IP of the transfer. It didn't come from a hacker in Russia or China. It came from a satellite uplink. Maritime uplink." Ryan's breath hitched, a sudden realization choking him. "Where are you, Daniel? Who are you with?" Daniel slowly lowered the phone. The connection cut out, replaced by a dead tone. He looked at the mirror. The lighting in the bathroom had changed. It was red now, deep, dark room red. On the glass of the mirror, condensation had been wiped away to reveal writing. It wasn't written in steam. It was etched into the glass with something sharp. "The debt is due." Daniel stumbled backward, hitting the stall door with a crash. He wasn't on a holiday. He was in a holding cell. He rushed out of the bathroom, panic overriding all logic. He needed to find Andrew. Andrew was his only ticket out. If he could get Andrew to sign, he could use the 50 million to flee, to bribe, to disappear to a country with no extradition treaty. He ran down the corridor, but the ship seemed different. The air was colder. The corridor seemed longer, stretching out like a nightmare. And the art, the abstract storms were gone. In their place were framed photographs, perfectly lit by gallery spotlights. Daniel stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The first photo was of him and Rebecca, smiling on their wedding day, cutting the cake. The second was Rebecca crying in court, the day he testified against her, his face a mask of false sorrow. The third was a blown-up copy of a bank transfer, the wire confirming the theft of her trust fund to start Harris Tech. The fourth was a photo of him and Sophie on a beach, date stamped 2 weeks before he filed for divorce. He wasn't walking down a hallway. He was walking down a timeline of his betrayal. Every step was an accusation. Daniel burst back into the dining room, his tie undone, sweat soaking his dress shirt, his eyes wild. "Andrew!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "We need to leave, now. There's a helicopter pad on the upper deck. I'll call a pilot. This ship, it's not safe. Someone is playing a sick game." The dining room was empty. The table had been cleared. The wine, the duck, the broken glass, the silverware, all gone. The black marble was wiped clean, gleaming under the low lights. Sitting at the head of the table, exactly where Daniel had sat, was a single object, a battered leather briefcase. Daniel walked toward it, his steps heavy and slow, drawn by a magnetic dread. He recognized the briefcase. It was his old one, the one he had claimed was stolen out of his car 3 years ago, the one containing the original handwritten ledgers of the fraud. He opened it with trembling fingers. It was empty, save for a single tablet computer. The screen lit up automatically as the lid opened. It was a live video feed. It showed Andrew Lewis, but he wasn't in a guest suite. He was standing on the bridge of the ship, bathed in the cool blue light of the navigation consoles, standing next to James Walker. "Andrew?" Daniel whispered, clutching the tablet. On the screen, Andrew looked directly into the camera lens. "The deal is off, Daniel. In fact, there never was a deal." "What are you talking about? You looked at the projections. You drank the wine." "I'm not a venture capitalist, Daniel," Andrew said, his voice calm, professional, and devastatingly clear. "I'm a forensic accountant hired by a private client to audit the acquisition of Harris Tech assets." "Acquisition?" Daniel stammered. "I'm not selling. I'm raising capital." "You already sold," Andrew corrected. "The shell company you used to charter this yacht, the contract was 80 pages long. You didn't read it. The collateral you put up for the promotional rate was your controlling stake in Harris Tech. You signed the agreement because you were desperate and greedy." Daniel's knees gave out. He collapsed into the chair, the tablet slipping from his hands. I own this ship for the week. I chartered it." "You rented a prison cell," James Walker's voice cut in from the screen, deep and finalizing. "And you paid for it with your own company." "Who?" Daniel screamed at the tablet, saliva flying. "Who is doing this? Who has this kind of money? Who hates me this much?" The video feed cut to black. The lights in the dining room died, plunging Daniel into absolute, suffocating darkness. Then a single spotlight snapped on. It illuminated the grand staircase at the far end of the room. Music began to play over the surround sound speakers. It wasn't ominous orchestral music. It was a song. Their song. "Wicked Game." The one they had danced to in their first apartment, barefoot on the linoleum, when they had nothing but each other. At the top of the stairs, The double doors opened. Rebecca Hayes stepped into the light. She wasn't wearing the business suit from the control room. She was wearing a gown of liquid silver that caught the spotlight like armor. It flowed around her as she moved, making her look like a goddess of war forged from moonlight. She held a champagne flute in one hand and a small remote control in the other. She descended the stairs slowly, every step a hammer blow to Daniel's heart. Click, click, click. "Hello, Daniel," she said. Her voice was amplified by the room's acoustics surrounding him. She stopped 10 feet from him, looking down with a gaze that could freeze a volcano. "Rebecca?" Daniel choked out, his brain refusing to process the image. "But you're broke. You're ruined." "I saw the filings." "I was," she admitted, taking a sip of champagne, her eyes never leaving his face. "But then I realized something. Trash, when compressed under enough pressure and time, becomes a diamond. Or oil. Either way, it becomes valuable and highly combustible." She gestured around the room with the flute. "Welcome to the Sovereign. My ship, my rules, my ocean." Daniel scrambled backward, knocking over the heavy chair. He crawled on his hands and knees away from her. "You planned this." "Sophie. Andrew. The storm." Sophie is currently in the infirmary, filling out a witness statement for the authorities regarding your admission of fraud, which she overheard tonight, Rebecca said coolly. "Andrew has already sent the digitized ledgers to the district attorney. The storm? That's just weather, Daniel. But the turbulence in your life, that's all me." "You can't do this," Daniel pleaded, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. "I'm your husband, ex-husband. We loved each other once." Rebecca laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound, sharp as broken glass. "You loved the reflection of yourself in my eyes, Daniel. And when I stopped reflecting what you wanted to see, you broke the mirror." She pressed a button on the remote. The wall behind her, the one covered in wine racks, began to rotate. Mechanisms groaned as the hidden gears engaged. The wall turned completely around to reveal the night sky and the churning, violent ocean. The glass doors slid open. The wind howled into the room, carrying the salt spray, whipping Rebecca's silver dress and Daniel's hair. "The helicopter is 5 minutes out," Rebecca said, her voice rising over the wind. "But it's not for you, it's for me. I have a board meeting in Zurich to finalize the acquisition of your assets." "What about me?" Daniel cried, shielding his eyes from the wind. "You can't leave me here, not in the middle of the ocean." "Oh, I'm not leaving you alone," Rebecca smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes, a look of terrifying satisfaction. "I'm leaving you with the crew. And Daniel, they're not on the payroll. They're the people you fired without severance, the people whose pensions you stole. They asked for 5 minutes with you." From the shadows of the kitchen, the engine room, and the hallways, figures began to emerge into the spotlight. Christopher Young, holding a heavy wrench, his face smeared with grease and anger. Nicole Carter, wiping her hands on a rag, her eyes hard. James Walker, cracking his knuckles, stepping forward from the bridge access. Rebecca turned and walked toward the open deck, her silver dress flowing like mercury, stepping out into the storm as if she commanded the elements themselves. "Enjoy the voyage, Daniel," she called back over her shoulder. "It's a long way back to shore." The wind on the open deck was merciless, a physical weight that tore at Daniel's clothes and stung his eyes with salt spray. But the chill seeping into his bones had nothing to do with the Atlantic storm brewing on the horizon. It radiated from the circle of people closing in around him. They didn't move with the chaotic anger of a mob. They moved with the terrifying precision of a machine Daniel had once owned, oiled with promises, and then stripped for parts. Christopher Young stepped forward first. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways of Harris Tech, Daniel had known him only as a line item on a budget spreadsheet. Lid Systems Engineer, Cost Center 402. Here, on the heaving deck of the Sovereign, Christopher was a towering figure of grease and grievance. He held a heavy pipe wrench loosely in his right hand, the metal dull and scarred, not brandishing it as a weapon, but holding it as a symbol of the labor Daniel had deemed disposable. "Do you remember me, mister?" "Harris?" Christopher asked. His voice was gravelly, cutting through the howling wind without shouting. "I worked for you for 15 years. I missed my son's graduation to fix the server crash of 19. I missed my anniversary to migrate the databases before the merger." Daniel backed up, his Italian loafers slipping on the wet teak until his spine collided with the cold steel of the railing. Below him, the dark water churned, a ravenous maw waiting to swallow him whole. I know you," Daniel stammered, his mind racing to find a name, a lever, anything. "Your systems. I approved your bonus in 20. You approved a liquidation of the pension fund in 22 to cover your bad bets in crypto," Christopher corrected, taking another step. The circle tightened. "When the fund collapsed, I lost my home. My daughter had to drop out of veterinary school. She waits tables now, because you needed a third vacation home in Aspen. It was a business restructuring," Daniel screamed, the wind snatching the words from his mouth. "I had to save the company. It wasn't personal." "You didn't save the company." Nicole Carter stepped out from behind James Walker. Daniel flinched. Nicole had been the stewardess pouring his wine just hours ago, invisible and subservient. Now she had shed the uniform jacket, standing in a plain grey shirt that made her look like a judge in purgatory. "You saved your golden parachute," Nicole said, her voice trembling with a rage she had suppressed for 3 years. "I was your executive assistant, Daniel. I managed your calendar. I bought the anniversary gifts for Rebecca that you couldn't be bothered to pick out. I saw the memos. I saw you sign the order to cut our severance packages to 0 on the same day you booked a private jet to Fiji for a mental health retreat." "I didn't know the severance was 0. Daniel lied. The lie came automatically, a defensive reflex honed over a decade of boardroom evasions. "Ryan handled the HR details. I just signed what was in front of me. Ryan is singing like a canary in a federal interrogation room right now," James Walker said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Daniel's chest. He checked his tactical watch, the glow of the dial illuminating his hard face. "We received a secure comms update 5 minutes ago. Ryan is trading your secrets for a reduced sentence. He's telling them about the shell companies, the cooked books, and the insurance fraud on the prototype fires." James stepped closer, invading Daniel's personal space. "But this isn't about the law, Daniel. The law is cold. The law is distant. This is about memory." The circle tightened further. There were others now, faces emerging from the shadows of the superstructure. A deckhand who had been a junior developer, a cook who had been a project manager. They stood silent, living testaments to his greed. They forced him to look at their faces, the deep lines of stress etched around their eyes, the grey hairs, the clothes that were functional rather than fashionable. For the first time in his life, Daniel couldn't fire them. He couldn't call security to have them escorted out. He couldn't delete their emails or block their numbers. He was trapped in a room with the consequences of his actions, and there was no exit door. "What do you want?" Daniel whimpered, sliding down the railing until he was crouching. "Money? I can get you money. I have accounts Ryan doesn't know about. Switzerland, Singapore. Take it, just let me go." "We don't want your stolen money," Christopher said, looking down at Daniel with profound disgust. He dropped the heavy wrench, It hit the teak deck with a deafening clang that sounded like a gavel strike. That would be too easy. We just wanted you to know that the engine keeping you afloat, the one you ignored and neglected, we control it now, and we are turning it off. James Walker reached into his pocket and pulled out a satellite phone. It was heavy, ruggedized rubber, and the screen was glowing green. He held it out to Daniel. "The Coast Guard is 20 miles out," James said calmly. "They received a distress signal regarding a corporate fugitive attempting to flee jurisdiction. The coordinates are locked." Daniel stared at the phone. You called them?" "We are law-abiding sailors," James said with a terrifying smile. "You can wait for them in the brig, shackled to a pipe, or you can wait here in the wind and think about the view." "But the Sovereign, she doesn't carry passengers who don't pay their debts." Daniel looked at the phone, then at the crew, and finally down at the black, churning water. He realized with a sinking, nauseating horror that they weren't the monsters in this story. He was. They were just the mirror Rebecca had promised, a reflection he could no longer shatter. The arrest was not the cinematic spectacle Daniel had imagined in his anxiety-fueled nightmares. There were no helicopters swirling overhead with searchlights, no SWAT teams rappelling down ropes. It was humiliatingly, brutally bureaucratic. A U.S. Coast Guard cutter, the Sentinel, pulled alongside the Sovereign just as dawn began to bleed across the eastern sky, painting the clouds in bruises of purple and violent orange. The sea was choppy, making the transfer between the massive yacht and the smaller government vessel a clumsy, undignified affair. Daniel was handcuffed not by a high-ranking marshal, but by a young, bored-looking petty officer who checked the tightness of the zip ties with indifferent efficiency. There were no cameras, no paparazzi to document his fall from grace, just the silent, stoic crew of the yacht watching from the railing above. As he was led down the gangway, stumbling in his ruined loafers, Daniel looked back up one last time. High above, on the owner's private deck, he saw a silhouette against the rising sun. Rebecca. She wasn't watching him. She wasn't gloating. She was leaning against the railing, looking toward the open horizon, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. The wind caught her silver hair, blowing it back like a banner. She had already moved on. He was no longer the villain in her life. He was just a footnote in her morning routine, a piece of trash that had finally been taken out. The transfer to federal custody in New York was a blur of processing centers, fingerprints, and the stripping away of his identity layer by layer. The Italian silk suit, stained with salt and sweat, was bagged and tagged. The handmade shoes were tossed into a plastic bin. The Rolex, his symbol of time and power, was traded for a plastic wristband with a barcode. He was given an orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's despair. His cell was a 6x8 concrete box with a stainless steel toilet and a mattress as thin as a yoga mat. His first visitor, 3 days later, was not a high-priced lawyer. It was Sophie Lawson. She sat on the other side of the thick glass partition, the phone receiver cradled against her shoulder. She looked different. The heavy contouring makeup was gone, revealing the freckles she usually hid. The designer dress was replaced by a simple white blouse and jeans. She looked younger, yet infinitely more mature. "Sophie," Daniel breathed into the phone, relief flooding his chest. He pressed his hand against the glass. "Thank God, you have to help me. You have to tell them I was coerced. Tell them Andrew Lewis entrapped me. We can fight this." Sophie looked at him, not with love, and not even with hate. She looked at him with a pity that stung worse than a slap. "I already told them everything, Danny," she said softly. "I gave them the recordings." Daniel froze. Recordings? Chloe, the medic on the ship? She gave me a digital recorder before dinner that night. She told me you were going to throw me under the bus if things went south. She said men like you always need a shield. Sophie sighed, shaking her head. And you did, Danny. In the infirmary, I heard you screaming at Andrew. You tried to blame me for the offshore accounts. You said I was the signatory. I was panicked, Daniel pleaded, his voice cracking. I didn't mean it. I was just trying to buy time so we could both get away. It doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what you did, Sophie said, standing up. She reached into her bag and pulled out a manuscript. I'm writing a book, Daniel. About the yacht, about the lies, about how a girl from Ohio got caught up in a billionaire's delusion. A book? Daniel stared at the stack of papers. Rebecca, she's helping me get it published, Sophie said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. She introduced me to her literary agent. She says women should stick together instead of fighting over men who don't deserve either of them. Rebecca! Daniel slammed his hand against the glass, the sound echoing in the small room. She's manipulating you. She's using you to get to me. No, Sophie said firmly, turning toward the heavy steel door. She just showed me that I don't need a captain to sail my own ship. She gave me a compass, Daniel. You only ever gave me anchor. Sophie, don't walk away. Sophie! She didn't look back. As the door clicked shut, Daniel was left alone, with his reflection in the plexiglass. Under the harsh fluorescent buzz, he looked old. He looked small. He looked exactly like a man who had sold his soul for the world and forgotten to collect the check. 6 months later. The courtroom drama had dominated the financial news cycle for weeks, stripping Harris Tech down to its rotten bones for the public to see. But the headlines had faded. Daniel Harris was sentenced to 15 years in a minimum security federal facility for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Ryan Mitchell took a plea deal for 10. The empire was dissolved. In the glittering harbor of Monaco, the Sovereign prepared for a new voyage. The ship looked different. The intimidating, predator-black hull had been repainted a deep, majestic navy blue. The name on the stern was polished gold. It was no longer a vessel for chartering insecure billionaires or trapping ex-husbands. Rebecca Hayes stood on the bridge, the hum of the engines beneath her feet, a comforting, rhythmic purr. The Sovereign was now the mobile headquarters of the Phoenix Foundation, a global non-profit dedicated to recovering stolen assets for victims of corporate fraud and funding education for underprivileged engineers. All systems green, Miss Hayes, Christopher Young called out from the engineering console. He looked 10 years younger than the man who had held the wrench on the stormy deck. His uniform was crisp, his shoulders back, his pride restored. He was doing the work he loved, for a boss who respected him. Course set for the Aegean, James Walker confirmed, standing at the helm. The mercenary edge was gone from his eyes, replaced by the calm focus of a true captain. We have a lead on a shell company in Athens that defrauded a teachers' union. The weather is clear. Thank you, James. Thank you, Christopher, Rebecca said. She walked over to the main console and touched the throttle. She walked out onto the forward deck, into the bright Mediterranean sunshine. The sea was a vast, open canvas of possibility, glittering like a field of crushed diamonds. For a moment, her mind drifted back to Daniel. She imagined him sitting in his cell, staring at a concrete wall, wondering where it all went wrong. She waited for the familiar pang of bitterness, the urge to gloat, the heat of anger. But there was nothing. The hatred had evaporated, leaving behind a profound, weightless peace. She hadn't just defeated him. She had outgrown him. She had taken the wreckage of her life, the betrayal that nearly broke her, the debt that nearly drowned her, the shame that nearly silenced her. And she had built a vessel that could weather any storm. She had learned that true power wasn't about controlling others, or accumulating wealth, or winning the argument. It was about mastering yourself. It was about standing in the storm and not blinking. She took a deep breath of the salty air, filling her lungs with the future. It smelled of ozone and freedom. "Let's go," she whispered to the wind. The engines roared, not with a growl but with a song of liberation. The Sovereign cut through the waves, leaving a wake of white foam that quickly settled, erasing the path behind it, leaving only the endless, open ocean ahead. The horizon is not a line that separates the sky from the sea. It is a promise that there is always further to go. Daniel Harris spent his life chasing a crown made of fool's gold, believing that worth was measured in what you could take from others. He built a fortress of lies, thinking it would protect him, only to learn too late that the heaviest chains are the ones we forge ourselves. Rebecca Hayes taught us that a queen does not need a king to rule. She only needs a compass and the courage to steer into the storm. She turned her heartbreak into a hull of steel and her tears into the fuel that propelled her toward destiny. She showed us that the best revenge is not destruction, but creation, building a life so magnificent that the past becomes insignificant. In the end, we are all captains of our own souls. We can choose to anchor ourselves in the bitter harbors of yesterday, or we can raise the anchor, catch the wind, and sail toward a dawn of our own making. If this story of justice, resilience, and the high seas moved you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Let's continue to explore the depths of the human heart together. Until the next voyage, may your seas be calm and your compass true.